Okay, so today we're finishing our last lesson in our decimal computation unit on how to divide one decimal number by another decimal number. And this will finish up our study of Common Core State Standard 5 NBT 7, which is to add, subtract, multiply, and divide decimals to the hundredths. So in our previous lesson, we did learn how to divide a decimal by a whole number. If you'll recall, we just brought our decimal points straight up in our quotient and then divided as if they were regular whole numbers, being a little bit more careful with the placement of the digits in the quotient, and remembering that we don't have remainders in these problems. We have to annex or add zeros to our dividend until the problem works out or starts to repeat. Today's problems, we're going to take a look where we have a decimal point in our divisor as well as in our dividend. And you might be looking at this and thinking to yourself, oh, I'm not sure what to do. Well, let me see if I can explain it, what we're going to do, in a way that makes more sense to you. So let's say that I had the problem 10 divided by 5. Okay? You know that the answer to 10 divided by 5 is 2, right? Because 5 times 2 is 10. What happens here if I multiply both the dividend and the divisor by 10? Well, 5 times 10 is 50, and 10 times 10 is 100. And if I divide 100 divided by 50, I get 2, because 50 times 2 is 100. So you'll notice I multiplied both the divisor and the dividend by 10, but my answer is still the same. Well, when we're dividing a decimal by another decimal, that's essentially what we're going to do. I want to make my divisor a whole number. It makes it easier to divide with. In order to get that 3/10 to be just 3, I need to move the decimal. And I'm going to need to move it to the back. Remember that in our whole numbers, the decimals are always at the end. So I want it to go at the end. So I had to move this over one place to the right. Well, that's essentially the same thing. What I've basically done is multiplied this number by 10. If I multiply the divisor by 10 or move the decimal one place to the right, I have to do the exact same thing in my dividend. Otherwise, I will get a different answer when I divide. Now, I'm going to rewrite my problem so that my decimals are in their new places. Okay? So that way I'm not getting confused by, where's the decimal here if I move it and then bring it up. If I rewrite my problem, I get rid of these arrows, get rid of the decimals where they're not supposed to be, and I'm much more likely to get the correct answer. So again, now I've got a problem where I'm just dividing by a whole number, and I remember how to do that from yesterday. The first thing I do is bring my decimal point straight up. And then I'm going to more or less forget that it's there. 3 goes into 7 2 times, which is 6. Subtract, I get 1. Is 1 less than 3? It is. So I'm okay to bring down this 2. 3 goes into 12 4 times. Remember that the 4 has to be above the 2. 4 times 3 is 12. Subtract, I get 0. And I'm going to bring down my 6. 3 goes into 6 twice, which is 6. Subtract, and I get 0 again. But again, I still got numbers to bring down, so I have to bring down that 9. And 3 goes into 9 3 times, which is 9. And when I subtract, I get 0. I have no more numbers to bring down. And so my answer to this problem is going to be 242 3/10. Now you might be looking back at the original problem and saying, well, wait a minute. My answer shouldn't be larger than the number that I started with. But remember, we didn't keep this same number. We multiplied it by 10. Our answer, or the number that we're dividing, is 726. So this is a reasonable answer. If you go back to the original problem, you have to keep in mind, in the original problem, we're dividing by a number that's smaller than 1. If you divide by a number that is smaller than 1, your answer will actually get bigger than what you started with. I know it's a little bit of a confusing concept, but with some more practice, you'll see what I'm talking about. So let's take a look at another example. In this case, we have the problem 18 and 6/10, and we're going to divide that by 12 hundredths. Okay? Again, I want to make my divisor a whole number. So in this case, I have to move my decimal point to the right, not once, but twice, to get it behind the 2. Well, again, like we talked about in the previous example, if I move that one twice, I have to move this one twice, which means I'm going to have to move it 1, 2 times. But if you'll notice, I don't have another 0 here. So what do you think you're going to have to do? Well, just like with everything else, you're going to need to annex another 0, and the decimal point would go at the end. So my problem is going to change to 12 is my divisor, and actually 1,860 as my dividend. Now I'm going to just do my long division as normal. 12 goes into 18 once. Subtract, I get 6. 6 is less than 12, so I'm okay to bring down that 6. 12 goes into 66 5 times, which is 60. When I subtract, I get 6. Bring down a 0. 12 goes into 60 5 times. I have a 0 here. I have no more numbers to bring down, so my quotient is going to be 155. So let's go ahead and get your notes ready to fill out. We'll fill those out and we'll do a couple more examples. Okay, so if we take a look at our notes, we looked at what we do first in a division problem. The first thing we're going to do is move the decimal point. So if we take a look at our notes, we're going to go ahead and fill in the blanks together. The first thing we need to do in number 1 is move the decimal point in the divisor to the right as many times as needed to make it a whole number. Okay? Then we're going to move the decimal in the dividend to the right the same number of times in order to keep the problem balanced. And as we did find out, we might need to add 1 or more zeros in order to do this. Don't forget that the decimal point in a whole number is always at the end. Okay? Once we have moved our decimal points, we are going to rewrite the problem with the decimals in their new places. And then we're going to divide following the same steps as dividing decimals by whole numbers. Okay? So now let's take a look at a couple of more examples, and then we'll move on. Okay, so in our first example, we have the problem 8 hundredths divided by 1 6/10. Okay? This one, remember when we see the division symbol, this division symbol, this is our dividend, this is our divisor. So when we rewrite it, this is how it's going to look to start with. Okay? Now, if we notice, we have a decimal in our divisor that we don't want, so we're going to have to move it 1 time. If we move that one once, we move this one once. And then we're going to rewrite the problem with our decimal in the correct position. Now we bring our decimal point straight up in our dividend, and we're going to start our division. Does 16 go into 0? No. So I put a 0. Does 16 go into 8? Now I'm not asking does 8 go into 16, that's a different problem. This question says, does 16 go into 8? And again, the answer is no, so I put a 0 there. But I have an 8 here. I have no other numbers to bring down. So, yep, I'm going to have to annex a 0 and bring that down. How many times does 16 go into 80? Well, let's try 5. 5 times 6 is 30. Carry 3. 5 times 1 is 5. Plus 3 is 80. So my answer to this original problem is what I have here. 0 and 5/100ths. If I take a look at my fourth example, again, this is division written with a division bar. Okay? The divisor is on the bottom. I have a decimal in my divisor, which I don't want. I want it at the end. So again, I have to move my decimal point over once, twice. If I move that one twice, I have to move this one twice. And I'm going to rewrite my problem with my decimals in the correct places now. Again, bring your decimal point straight up, and then just divide like you normally would. 4 goes into 21 5 times, which is 20. Subtract, I get 1. Bring down my 6. 4 goes into 16 4 times. I have a 0 here. No more numbers to bring down, so my problem is finished, and I end up with an answer of 5 4/10.